Hi, so today I want to talk about some more of the DBT skills and we're going to look at one of the skills from the distress tolerance module. So remembering these skills in this module are about getting through a situation without making it worse. They are not problem solving skills, they're not going to make the situation better necessarily, but they will let you tolerate the distress so you can get through that moment and get through those emotions without doing something that then has secondary consequences for yourself. So the skill that we're going to talk about today is called Wise Mind Accepts, and Accepts is the acronym of the 7 different parts of this skill which allow us to distract ourselves from our emotional distress in the moment. And I'm going to take you through each of those letters of Accepts, let you know what the skill is, how it works, and also give you some examples of what you can do to implement that skill. So if we start with A, so A of the Wise Mind Accepts stands for activities, and this is about doing something to allow you to step back from the situation and step back from the emotional pain that you're experiencing. And so by doing something, this allows us to block the cognitive, so the thoughts that we're having. It allows us to have some distance from the physiological changes that we're experiencing, and also by doing something different it may then allow us to block that behavioural action urge. So by doing something different to maybe what our behavioural urge is to do in that moment. So some of the things that people do for activities are things like tidying, cleaning, watching TV, listening to music, going for a walk, talking to a friend. But activities is really very much a behavioural skill. So it's actually about doing something in that moment that provides you with a different experience to the emotions you're experiencing at the time. Moving on to the second letter, so that's C, and that stands for contributing. So again, that distracts, as all of these skills do, but this does it in a slightly different way. So contributing is about, in that moment when things are difficult for you, doing something for somebody else. So doing something pleasant or nice for somebody else, or doing something helpful for somebody else. And this allows us to distract because what it does is it takes the focus from ourselves and the experience that we're having at that moment and broadens our perspective so we can then think about somebody else. What it also does when we contribute a lot of the time is it makes us feel good about ourselves. As human beings, we like to connect with other people and we like to do things to help other people. So not only does the skill of contributing help to distract ourselves by taking our mind off things, but it actually can make us feel better about ourselves in the moment and can improve our self-esteem as well because we're helping somebody else and we generally get quite a good feeling from that. So that might be giving a compliment to somebody, making somebody a cup of tea, maybe writing a card to somebody, writing a letter to somebody. And it doesn't have to be big. It's not about spending money or buying things for people because that can create its own difficulties. But it's about in that moment, how can I help somebody? How can I do something pleasant? Even if it's reading a book to somebody or letting somebody else watch something on TV that they want to watch rather than what you were going to watch. And that can help us just allow us to step back from the emotional content that we're experiencing at the time. The third letter is another C, so from our Wise Mind Accepts, and this is about comparisons. Now this can be quite tricky for some people, but this is about distracting ourselves by widening our perspective of things. What happens sometimes when we're in distress or in an unpleasant situation, we get very blinkered and the only thing that we can see in that moment is that distress, is that thing that's happened to us in that moment. And quite often that feels really, really big. And so when we think about comparison, this is about taking a step back from what we're experiencing and comparing ourselves to maybe how other people cope in a situation or how other people are having to deal with unpleasant situations and having to go through difficult situations. Now, this can allow us to take more of a realistic perspective on the difficulties we're experiencing at the time, which in itself can just lessen those emotions. So it might be that when we're experiencing difficulties, we might want to think about other people in the world that are experiencing difficulties that maybe are bigger than what we're experiencing. So things like thinking about people that are homeless maybe, or thinking about people that have been in natural disasters. And that allows us to just gain some perspective on the difficulties that we're experiencing at the time. Now, this is not to invalidate our own emotional pain. Our emotional pain is there, and just because some other people are going through a difficult situation doesn't mean that we shouldn't feel our emotional pain, but it allows us to step back from it. It allows us to take a bit more of a realistic perspective on things. Sometimes I've heard that people have found this quite difficult, and it's actually made them feel quite guilty. They've thought about how other people are struggling with things that seem so much bigger, and that's made it quite difficult for them in that moment. So what you could also do, if that is too difficult, is you could think about comparing yourself to how maybe you have coped in the past. And that works in two ways. Either you compare to yourself and think, actually, I'm coping better than I was previously. Or you can look back and think, oh, actually, I coped better with this previously. And then you can think about what was I doing in that moment. And that can help have a bit of hope for yourself to be able to get through this situation in the moment. So moving on to the fourth letter. So that is E. And so that stands for emotions. And in this moment, it's about trying to prompt opposite emotions to the ones that you're feeling in the moment. So this helps to distract us because it allows us to step out of the emotion that maybe in that moment feels like it's all consuming for us. So what we would need to do is to be able to recognise what emotions we're feeling in the moment and then prompt a different emotion. So it might be, if you're feeling angry, you might want to do something that prompts an emotion of feeling content, feeling quite calm. So maybe listening to relaxation music. Maybe if we're feeling sad about something, we might want to do something that prompts an emotion of happiness or joy. So maybe watching a comedy film or reading a joke book or talking to somebody about a funny event that's happened to you. And so it's really about prompting a different emotion in that moment, and that can help us distract from what we're feeling and allow that original emotion just to settle slightly and to calm slightly. So then if we so want to go on and problem solve, we can do that. So then moving on to the next letter, and that is P. And this one stands for pushing away. And this can either be literally in the moment, or it can also be more kind of theoretical and metaphorical as well. And pushing away is about stopping yourself being in that moment and blocking the emotional content. So that might be pushing away by leaving the situation. If you're in a situation that is being quite emotional for you, what you might want to do is just move away from that situation and take the trigger out of the situation, which will allow you to calm and allow your emotions to come down. But sometimes we can't leave a situation. And so what we can do is we can push away by stopping ourselves thinking about that in that moment. And so we don't get then wrapped up in the thoughts and wrapped up in the emotions. And so some ways that people have spoke to me about doing this is they might put what they're thinking in a box, lock the box, and then put the box in a cupboard. Now this is all in your head, and it's something that you can imagine. Other people have spoken about blowing their problems into a balloon, tying it up and then letting the balloon float away. Other people have thought about putting their thoughts and their emotions onto a cloud and then allowing the cloud to blow away as well. So pushing away is really about creating some distance between the situation, the emotions and the thoughts. And so that allows them just to calm down slightly. What you have to remember with this one is it's not a skill that you can do all of the time, because then our pushing away turns into avoidance, and then that makes things more difficult for us. So pushing away is really an emergency skill when we're in a crisis situation and we need something in that moment to create some distance so we don't end up doing something that makes the situation worse. So moving on, we then get to T, and T stands for thoughts. And so what we can do sometimes is we can create a situation where we're thinking about something, and that allows us to stop the other thoughts, maybe the worries, the rumination, kind of popping into our head and getting stuck there and growing. So thoughts is by doing something that makes your brain work. That's why it's slightly different to activities. So something that takes up some mental capacity for you. And so I've heard people say that they use crosswords or word searches, dot to dot, spot the difference, Sudoku is a great one, or even just counting back from 100 in fours. It's anything that uses your brain, and so your brain doesn't have the space to think about maybe those other thoughts which are unpleasant for you in that moment. And then moving on to the last one, and the last letter is S of our Wise Mind Accepts, and S stands for sensations, and really this is about intense sensations. So this is different to our self-soothe. Our self-soothe is about calming and something that's quite pleasant. When we think about sensations for Wise Mind Accepts, it's about doing something that's quite intense, and so it then distracts you from your emotions or from your thoughts in that moment. And it's a really good one for grounding ourselves in the moment. So if we think about somebody who maybe experiences flashbacks, or somebody who dissociates, somebody who gets really caught up in their memories, or somebody that just has really, really heightened emotions, intense sensations can be really, really good to ground somebody in the moment, bring them back to the present moment and allow those emotions to come down slightly. So these are not necessarily things that people find soothing. They don't necessarily have to be pleasant sensations. And so some of the things that we have used are ice cubes. So holding onto ice and holding onto it quite tightly. That can be quite a distraction. So it can bring all of your attention rather from your emotions and your thoughts. It brings it down to that physiological sensation of holding onto the ice. You can get the same sensation if you use lemon. So cutting up a lemon and then biting on a lemon. And if you think about doing that, what you have in that moment is a sensation that is so intense that it takes all of your attention. You could also do it with extra strong mints or really sour sweets. So we use some sweets called toxic waste sweets, and they are really sour and actually quite unpleasant, but they work really well in focusing your attention on that one thing. What people have also used is rubber bands around their wrist or hair bands, and if you ping that against your wrist, that can be quite a strong sensation as well, and so that can focus your attention on that sensation rather than the difficult or unpleasant emotions you're feeling at the time. So that's a bit of a rundown of the skill of Wise Mind Accepts. So all of these skills are about distracting yourself in the moment so you can get through without making it worse for those emotions to come down slightly. So A stands for activities. Your first C stands for contributing. Your second C stands for comparisons. E stands for emotions, so opposite emotions. P stands for pushing away, T for thoughts, and S for sensations, so intense sensations. And hopefully I've given you some ideas of what you can use for each of those. So now you can go away and you can practice and see which ones of those work for yourself in a situation that is difficult to tolerate.